Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. You know we love to take on big topics here, and, well, this one is a doozy. We're diving into the concept of simultaneous elections in India.
Simultaneous elections.
Yeah. You actually sent over a pretty hefty report from a high-level committee that was put together in India to explore this whole idea.
And you actually read the whole thing.
Well, I skimmed the super technical parts.
Okay, good.
But yeah, it's fascinating. It looks at all the different angles from the historical context to, what it could mean for the economy and even how it could change the way India is governed.
So what's the big idea here? Are we just talking about holding national and state elections at the same time?
It's actually even broader than that. They're looking at the possibility of bringing local elections into the mix as well.
Yeah.
Like imagine a single election day for every level of government, from the Lok Sabha all the way down to your local village council.
Wow. That's a pretty ambitious idea.
It is, and this report really digs deep into the nuts and bolts. It examines the constitutional considerations, what would have to change. It considers all the logistical challenges, and it even includes a wide range of opinions from political parties, legal experts, and everyday citizens.
So it sounds like they really tried to cover all the bases.
Hmm.
What's our mission for this deep dive? What are we hoping to unpack?
Well, I think it's important to understand that this idea of simultaneous elections isn't totally new in India.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. In the first couple of decades after independence, holding the Lok Sabha and state assembly elections at the same time was actually the norm.
Oh, so what changed?
Well, things got a bit messy. Certain state assemblies were dissolved prematurely for various reasons, which led to this staggered election system we see today.
So they're basically trying to go back to the way things used to be.
In a way, yeah. But imagine the impact if they actually pull this off. The entire nation participating in this massive democratic exercise every 5 years. It's really mind-boggling when you think about it.
Okay, so let's dig into the details here. What are some of the main arguments in favor of simultaneous elections? Why do they think this is such a good idea?
Well, the report highlights a number of potential benefits. One of the biggies is cost savings.
Oh, of course. Elections are expensive no matter where you are, but in a country the size of India, the cost must be astronomical.
Exactly. And get this. The committee estimates that simultaneous elections could save India a whopping 4.5 lakh crore rupees.
4.5 lakh crore, that's what, billions of US dollars?
Yeah, something like that. It's a truly staggering amount of money. And think about what could be done with those savings, building new schools, hospitals, infrastructure projects. The possibilities are endless.
All right, so that's a pretty compelling argument. Any other potential upsides?
Oh yeah, definitely. The report also argues that simultaneous elections could reduce disruptions to governance.
How so?
Well, in India, there's this thing called the Model Code of Conduct that kicks in before every election. It basically puts a freeze on major policy announcements and government projects.
Why do they do that?
The idea is to prevent the ruling party from using government resources to influence the election. But, when you have elections happening all the time, this model code of conduct can be in effect for a good chunk of the year.
Oh, I see. So it creates this stop and start cycle for the government. They can't really get anything done because they're always in campaign mode.
Exactly. And that can lead to what's often called policy paralysis. Crucial decisions get delayed, projects stall, and the government's ability to effectively address pressing issues is hampered.
Yeah, that makes sense. So simultaneous elections could potentially free up the government to actually, govern, focus on long-term goals and all that.
That's the argument, yeah.
All right, but what about the voters? Wouldn't holding fewer elections lead to, I don't know, less engagement?
That's a good question. But actually, the report suggests the opposite.
Yeah.
They point to evidence that shows, in some cases, aligning elections, especially with national elections, can actually increase voter participation. It's like this one-stop shop for fulfilling your civic duty.
I get it, yeah. Kill two birds with one stone.
Exactly. And the report also suggests that having fewer elections could lead to more focused political campaigns.
Interesting. So less about the constant campaigning and more about what actual policy discussions.
Exactly. Parties would have more time to delve into the issues, engage in substantive debates, and actually try to win voters over with, ideas rather than just slogans and rallies.
Okay, so we're talking potential cost savings, reduced disruptions to governance, increased voter engagement, and maybe even a more focused political discourse. Sounds pretty good, right? But I'm guessing it's not all sunshine and roses.
You're right about that. There are definitely some significant challenges to consider, and we'll get into those right after the break.
So, okay, let's talk about those challenges. What are some of the biggest hurdles they identified?
Well, one of the most obvious is that India's constitution currently mandates fixed terms for the Lok Sabha and state assemblies, meaning to make simultaneous elections work, you'd potentially need to amend the constitution, to allow for more flexibility in when elections happen.
I see. That's not exactly a simple fix.
Right. And that's where some of the bigger concerns come in.
Like what?
Well, some critics argue that messing with the election timelines could undermine the whole principle of federalism.
Okay, remind me. Federalism is.
Basically, it's the division of power between the national government and the states.
Right, right. Okay, so how would changing election timelines threaten federalism?
The worry is that it could give national parties an unfair advantage over regional parties. You know, if national elections and state elections always happen at the same time, national issues might overshadow local concerns. And that could potentially hurt the representation of those regional interests.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then there's the whole question of what happens if a government collapses before its term is up, or if no single party wins a majority.
Oh, right, those hung parliaments or assemblies. That happens even with our current system and leads to midterm elections, which would totally mess up the simultaneous election schedule, right?
Exactly. And the report actually digs into this. They suggest a couple of potential solutions, though.
Solutions like.
Well, one idea is to amend the Constitution to introduce this concept of a full term and an unexpired period.
Full term and unexpired period. Okay, break that down for me.
Sure. So a full term would basically be the standard 5 years we're used to. But let's say an assembly gets dissolved early, right? For whatever reason. The next election wouldn't have to be for a full 5 years. It would just be for the remainder of that original term, the unexpired period.
Oh, that's interesting. So even if there's a midterm election, the following election would still line up with the regular Lok Sabha elections.
Exactly. It's a way to keep things in sync without having to, completely reinvent the wheel.
Pretty clever. Did they have any other tricks up their sleeve for dealing with these timing issues?
They also suggested that there might need to be a one-time adjustment period, where some assembly terms might have to be extended a bit while others are shortened, just to get everything aligned initially.
A bit of a political puzzle, huh?
It's definitely complicated, but it's clear they put a lot of thought into this. And speaking of learning from others, did you know they actually looked at international best practices too?
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, they looked at countries like South Africa, Sweden, and Belgium. Each of those has its own system for managing simultaneous elections.
So they're basically trying to see what works in other places
Yeah.
and maybe borrow some ideas.
Yeah, exactly. It makes sense to learn from those who have already gone through this, right?
Absolutely. But, every country is different. So what works in one place might not necessarily translate perfectly to another.
That's true. But at least it gives them some models to consider, to see what's possible and what pitfalls to avoid.
Okay, so they've thought about the constitutional hurdles, the logistics of timing, and even looked at international examples. What about the people? Did they get any feedback from, everyday citizens, political parties, that sort of thing?
They did. The report actually includes a wide range of perspectives from all across the political spectrum. Some parties, like the BJP, were very much in favor of the idea.
Well, yeah, I can see why the ruling party would like it. All those cost savings, less campaigning.
But other parties, like the Congress, expressed some serious concerns.
Concerns like.
Well, they worried about the potential impact on federalism, which we talked about earlier, and also the possibility that national issues would overshadow local ones, potentially hurting the representation of those regional interests.
So there's definitely some debate going on here. It's not like everyone's on board with this idea.
Exactly. And it's not just the political parties either. They talk to legal experts, economists, even business organizations like FICCI and CII.
Yeah, the business community would definitely have a stake in this. What were their thoughts?
Well, some expressed concerns about potential uncertainty, during any kind of transition period. But there's also this fascinating economic analysis in the report.
Oh, and what did that say?
Get this. It suggests that in the long run, simultaneous elections could actually boost India's GDP.
Wait, hold on. Fewer elections equals a stronger economy. How does that work?
The thinking is that with fewer elections, there would be less political uncertainty, and that could encourage businesses to invest and expand, leading to more jobs and a stronger economy overall.
Interesting. Any downsides from the economic perspective?
Well, some critics argue that the analysis might be a bit too optimistic. that it's hard to know for sure what the actual impact would be.
Okay, fair enough. So we're seeing potential benefits and drawbacks on both
Hmm.
the political and economic fronts. What about the social side of things? Any insights there?
Definitely. And that's where things get really interesting.
The social implications are huge. Yeah. I mean, just imagine national and regional elections happening at the same time. How do you think that would affect the way political campaigns play out?
That's a really good question. It could make for a much more unified national conversation. But then again, maybe it would also mean that local issues get kind of drowned out by all the national stuff, right?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. And the report does touch on that.
Yeah.
Would it give too much power to the big national parties? Maybe at the expense of smaller regional parties or even independent candidates?
It definitely raises questions about representation, making sure everyone's voice is heard, not just the loudest ones.
Exactly. And it's not just about politics either. One thing that struck me in the report was they talked about the impact on education.
Oh, yeah. Like how schools are always being used as polling
Right.
places.
With fewer elections, you'd have fewer disruptions to the school year. Kids could actually, focus on learning without all those interruptions.
That's a really good point. I hadn't even thought about that.
Hmm.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The potential benefits, the challenges, the political, the economic, and the social angles. I'm curious, did the report come to any kind of conclusion? Like, what's the best way forward?
Well, that's the thing. They didn't really offer a definitive answer. It's more like they laid out all the different perspectives, all the pros and cons, so people can have a more informed debate.
So it's kind of like a starting point for a bigger conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. They've given us a lot to think about.
It's been an incredible deep dive. Simultaneous elections in India, it's not just some logistical puzzle, is it? It really gets to the heart of how democracy functions in such a diverse and complex country.
Absolutely. It's about representation, governance, the balance of power, all these big questions.
And it'll be really interesting to see how this whole debate unfolds. Will India ultimately decide to go for it, or will those concerns about the potential drawbacks prove to be too much?
Only time will tell.
Well, that's all the time we have for today, but we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful, and maybe it's even sparked some conversations of your own. It's certainly given me a lot to think about. And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and most importantly, stay engaged.